After the United States narrowly dodged a devastating national debt default, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is studying the history books and laying the groundwork for a new commission to tackle the growing problem. Speaker McCarthy worked to help negotiate a deal with the White House. This was to suspend the debt ceiling into January of 2025, all while also producing a projected $1.5 trillion in deficit savings over the coming decade. Mr. McCarthy says he has embraced the idea of establishing a new fiscal commission to find additional deficit reduction. But what about the impact of debt ceiling talks on the markets? Well, with us now to discuss the U.S. debt ceiling issue and investing is Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Ltd. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Wonderful to be back, Nima.
Always great to have you, Brendan. Now, we've heard a lot about the U.S. debt ceiling in the past few weeks, but can you explain to our viewers what it actually is and how it works?
Well, it was something that they came up with during the First World War, where they were going to rack up debt to go fight over in Europe. They didn't want this debt thing to get out of hand. So I don't know what it was back in 1917, but maybe it was $10 million, and now the U.S. owes $30 trillion. I mean, not even Dr. Evil could put a pinky to this corner of his mouth and say that with a straight face. So there's some enormous amount of money. The advantage to it is that this debt ceiling discussion is, although they've raised it something like 70 odd times since 1917, at least the U.S. Congress debates it, thinks about it, and the legislatively elected, democratically elected legislature has a discussion about it, and they invariably vote to raise it or suspend it or do something to allow the U.S. government to keep on borrowing. But unlike up here in the Great White North, at least there's some meaningful discussion about it.
And on that note, Brendan, can you tell us a little bit more about this tentative deal to raise the debt ceiling, what it means and what exactly this would look like?
Oh, nobody knows what exactly it'll look like. I think Speaker McCarthy would like it to mean that the U.S. just spends less. The U.S. has advantages over Canada in that they actually could do a lot more to raise taxes, in theory, but it is a country that literally came into being as a result of a rebellion because they didn't want to pay taxes. So, for example, they don't have a national sales tax. Most other Western countries do have one. They could introduce one. It would be politically incredibly costly, though. So on the one hand, there's a lot they can do. On the other hand, they spend all this money, and you'd think that a country that racking up this much debt would have a relatively socialist system, but the wealth disparity in America is the greatest among the Western countries. So I don't know. They spend an awful lot of money. In theory, they could raise taxes. They need to find a way to stop spending money to the same extent and yet not have that affect the people that are the most vulnerable in their country. That's a tough, so say what exactly it'll mean, nobody knows at this point.
We'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. Now, it seems like U.S. officials were really backed into a corner when it comes to raising this debt ceiling. So what are some of the pros and cons of raising this debt ceiling in the first place?
Well, the pros are the U.S. government keeps functioning business as usual. The con is that the U.S. government keeps functioning business as usual. In my working career, it wasn't even that long ago. I mean, it might be 20 years with the blip we had at COVID, time contracts, but they did actually, they keep talking about the U.S. government defaulting on the debt. That's not the first thing that happens. The first thing that happens is they just stop paying people, which isn't the same thing. So the U.S. military, for example, continues to serve, but they just don't get paid until the thing gets sorted out. So there are some, and that did happen in the last X number of years. I can't remember the last date. So the pros and the cons, the pros, the government keeps working, financial markets are relatively relaxed. The con is they're still racking up debt. And it's not just an American problem, it's a Western government problem where we're spending more. And now with interest rates being higher, the problem will literally start compounding on itself.
All right, Brendan, a quick 40 seconds left here. But in terms of the broader impact of this, what sort of effect do you see this having on the stock markets and on Canadian investors in particular?
Well, there is Canada in specific needs to come to grips with our own debt situation. We should have an easier time of it. In Congress, the U.S. Congress, they need to make both houses agree, and there isn't the same ability to make members of Congress agree on anything. They're each working for their little constituencies or states. In Canada, we should have a much easier time getting some sort of consensus, even in a minority parliament like we have. So I think the important thing for Canada is we don't have the same ability to borrow like the US does. We have to get our own financial house in order sooner rather than later. God bless you, Christia. Good luck.